Hello, hello. You are listening to The Duke. Today I'm raising attention to comments I've come across in the media and more overtly on social media, such as Twitter or Facebook. And it's starting to get annoying. I'm hearing people say they could never respect black conservatives in the UK. They could never respect black people that support the Tories. Why? I would ask, well, what do you mean you wouldn't respect people that have a different point of view to you? Is that very civil? And their reasons are mostly, straight to the viewpoint that if you support a political party for your own self-interest, while the same party is disproportionately hurting the black community. I've heard this so many times. What exactly? What exactly directly? What exactly is the Tory party doing to directly harm the black quote unquote community? It doesn't make sense. Where do they get these ideas from? Why is it directly an ethnic minority that they feel that this one party is overtly targeting? It's never had nailed, it just doesn't make sense. I'm just speechless. Like where do we start from this? So I was on social media, debating this idea with someone, and they weren't really giving clear reasons. And several of the reasons they brought up that were just quite vague. They listed the Windrush scandal, Grenfell stop and search, closing down youth centers, and just cutting down free school meals. I'm like, what? How are these directly harming black people? Is it directly, or is it just by the fact that if a certain group are more likely to be in a socio-economic bracket, that they are affected by certain policies? Fair enough. But when you play this race card, like I've repeatedly brought up in my previous video, you lose touch of what's really going on. It's lazy. It's lazy politics, you know? And I, debated with them on this case, and they were like mentioning all these, case by case scenario. Grenfell Tower, what does this have to do with anything? There's the burning tower building in central London, not central of, close to the city of London. And yes, poorer people, council estate, level type of, housing, they are more likely to be neglected. And it's the truth. And we have to deal with that. We can think critically about that without making it a bipartisan situation. These buildings were around during the Labour administration. These buildings were around with whoever the head of state were. So when you start directing these harmful rhetoric at one established, party, you lose, you know, and the argument, you lose the point. Like, what exactly are you, trying to prove? The- I've watched that video with that guy named Owen Jones about how conservatives are racist. You can have individuals in the party that make ignorant comments, but you can't paint a whole party with the same brush. If they've had a history of that and they have rebranded, like we can pull out examples from all over the world where parties used to be, you know, major sponsors to the KKK, Democrats of the US, but now for some reason, the black citizens, voters could look over that history and accept the Democrats for what they are. And we don't have a history to that extent when it comes to our political parties. Neither here or there on certain cases where migration and xenophobia is being used and charged on certain levels. But you can't play that same card, that race card, to justify your hatred towards people who think and um view things differently from you. It's unfair, it's lazy on your part, but it's ridiculous. But anyway, other points they tried to bring up was, so I mentioned the stop and search. Stop and search what? Okay, well, you live in London, you know that there's a knife crime rate that is insanely high at this point. We're figuring out ways to um deal with that, right? The government are working on that. The issue is the police cuts, so and so. We can directly criticize certain policies that have impacted the security of our major cities in the UK without making it so justifiably racial. And I'm tired of talking about these subjects without us being very, you know, very clear on the message here, rather than making everything about such a surface level situation. Stop and search isn't a bipartisan policy, especially in London. London, of all places, is under a Labour, you know, all the almost all the boroughs are Labour influence, Labour mayor, Sadiq Khan. What have they done to manage these crime rates and what young people being affected? It's not a black thing, because we've heard about the cases that happened a decade ago with the Scots in Glasgow. It was the same high spike in rates over there in Glasgow, and they sorted it out as necessary. And we could do the same thing. Maybe not in the same model because it's a different city with different aspects, but the demographically, it wasn't. We weren't dealing with black boys stabbing each other. It was white working class boys harming each other, stabbing each other, the same way it's happening in London. But we don't want to um discuss this without sounding what racist. Like, what does this mean? Yes, it's true. People who assume right leaning will be racially charged. That's the truth. That's where we could address it too. You know, there are racists who assume that, oh, because they see a bunch of black kids being stabbed, this means that there's an epidemic based on race, when it's socioeconomic and all these conditions there, family values. We can point to all these aspects that mirror exactly what was happening in Glasgow 10 years ago. And how did they solve it? We should be discussing solutions, not racial epithets and anecdotal scenarios where everything is charged. Who's to blame? Who's to blame? Let's find solutions. But you have both on the side of the left and the right, they play on these narratives. But now it's even worse on the left. People in the media. I was gonna even show. Can you see? I have a slideshow of Labour MPs and politicians pointing out the fact that we have black members of cabinet, representing the conservatives. Why? Why is it a big deal? And we all have different views. What does this mean? So James Cleverly, an MP, black mixed race politician, shouldn't really matter. It's just the idea that the Labour Party sort of masked themselves as the representative for every ethnic minority, regardless of socioeconomics, regardless of family values, and what we deem supports our policies. We're so diverse: black, Asian, minority, ethnic. This terminology, BAME, is, to me, it's like whatever. But these groups who are quote unquote non-white are diverse. You know, we're not all in the same economic bracket. We're not all living in the same regions. We are more likely concentrated in the cities in the southeast, but it doesn't mean we share the same views. In fact, some of our values are conservative. Like, these ethnic minorities have families, heritage that come from very conservative cultures. So to assume that ethnic minorities will automatically follow the Labour Party it is ridiculous. But there is a history of that making sense, because, of course, you have generations of people who migrated here, and xenophobia may have been a major issue back then. That makes sense that there were rhetoric coming from the right against, this migration shift, and the Labour Party were in support of those who were first generation, migrant population who were here in the 60s and 70s. There was an error of that. I agree. There was racism. And there were individuals who used racially charged rhetoric to galvanize their support and followers. But to be honest, it always boils down to the same scenario. It's all economic. It's all about a class system. Who is benefiting who the most? Labor has traditionally been for those who were in the working class, lower skilled jobs, the coal miners, the those, in what do you call these groups? Damn it, I forgot the name. Uh, that might it might come back to me, but there's a certain demographic of people who voted for Labour. It wasn't it wasn't surface based. It was essentially economic class. The UK is still dealing with a class system, and we get that. We can face that, you know. But now the Labour Party are creating this narrative that ethnic minorities obviously should be on the side of the left at all, you know, case in point. There is no doubt about it. Like how do they conclude with this? It just doesn't make sense. That's how ignorant some people in these positions become, right? Jeremy Corbyn here says only Labour can be trusted to unlock the talent of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people who have been held back by the Conservatives. Held back. We will guarantee equality is at the heart of our program for government. I mean, it's great to ensure there is inclusion and assimilation. That's the word I would use for different groups, that aren't the general, ethnic makeup of the country. You're down for for the little man, those smaller percentage than the white Brits. That's fair, but when you focus on just race and just the background of the person, where it's justified that our politics is based on our ethnicity, that's dangerous. That is dangerous. And that turned me off the Labour engine, essentially, because that's not what we play into. It was always economical, or if it was always based on policies that resonate with the people. But now it's turned into identity politics, a very dangerous avenue that we're seeing a lot around the world, and now it's permeating the UK political sphere. We do not need this narrative. It's dangerous, you know? People in the media are making it worse. A lot of people in the media establishment allied with these, urban city elites that essentially feud this narrative over and over again, that it's a racial thing. People, black and brown people that exist on the right leaning part of politics are basically shrills, are pawns for the Tory party, or for even the Brexit party, or for the UKIP party. That has nothing. It has nothing to do with race. They have a point of view that they feel is reflected by the party they represent. They're not in it for the money. Politics in the UK doesn't really work on that. It really doesn't. I read into a lot of these politicians um from different ethnic, groups, that I tried to figure out, what attracted them to, these politics. I read about Priti Patel, her. her story of getting into politics, essentially it's a family kind of thing. It was almost like it starts from a young age, or it could come from a life experience. But Priti Patel, she was influenced by her family upbringing. Essentially, what people don't want to realize, especially these um, social justice warriors, is that they don't want to admit that ethnic minorities are more likely to be conservative in terms of cultural and family values. We tend to be right leaning. We have family from third world countries with conservative values, parents, grandparents who have conservative values, and most of the time fled from socialist leaning governments to a more quote unquote liberal, but a more established nation. The UK attracted our parents, our grandparents, for a reason. And this the need to translate it into liberal left politics, is to assimilate, or is to be accepted. And I'll get into that more in another video on multiculturalism, because it gets complicated. We need to have an honest discussion on it. Another case, when I was debating this person, they brought up the Windrush scandal. The Windrush scandal, it cannot, and these people can't play that game where they want to blame a party, because I can sit here and criticize any policy, any action taken by any side of politics, conservative, labor, anyone can get these hands. We have to critique. You might want to defend one point of view on another, but honesty comes first, and what you believe is true. You can't play this sort of um antagonist direction. It's just I'm mumbling on, but let me go through it again. So debating this person, they brought up the Windrush scandal, and how the Tories are to blame. The Windrush scandal actually spans 4 to 5 to 6 decades of government mismanagement of the citizens involved, their status, of Caribbean background, that fell into through the cracks, essentially, because these aren't like, this wasn't like all the whole wave of Caribbeans who were coming in, you know, contributing to the UK employment failures. And they it was essential. That era was very important. And to be honest, these were infants that came under their parents' passports. If people just read into it and realize it's a sort of complicated process, it's been addressed accordingly. It was a mismanagement. It was foul, in fact, but decades long, that just ended up tying down to this case with this scandal. And it's typically placing the blame on the Tories alone does an injustice to what it caused, when Labour played their part as well in neglecting the migrant status when they were in office. So this straw man argument, when it's a government wide agenda, is lazy. It's easy to turn this issue on cuts and neglect of certain, demographics or certain regions of the country into racial rhetoric, when it actually affects all groups of a certain socio-economic bracket. White working class make up the majority of those who are neglected, and they raise that case. It's not a racial thing. We're not living in the America, where it is there are a few racialized politics, bipartisan, a history of that. But it's different here, and I think people really project on a behavior they see internationally when we have different aspects in this country. You can't play on this race. Let me just move on. The poor aren't predominantly black in the UK. I've said it again. They are predominantly white working class. But people tend to spin it into a black versus the establishment agenda. That's how lazy politics has become in the media and whatnot. It's ridiculous. I make a habit to criticize the government as they stand now, even the Tories as they stand now. I would, pick on the cases that need to be, you know, um debated, regardless of who I support. But people don't do this. People turn into, turn everything into a team sport, like it is tribalism to an extent. So when someone says they can't respect black people that hold certain views because you consider that your views more compassionate because the Labour Party, so recognizes your existence more. What does this mean? For example, you know, why not engage with these people, and figure out where they're coming from? Why do they support the Tories? Instead of brushing them over and placing labels on them like coon and Uncle Tom, again, American epithets, because that's just how people play now. I've been, for example, left leaning, supported the Labour Party since I was we tend to at a young age going into uni. You just assume that, hey, the good guys must be on the left. And the more you research into it, because that's when the more you get into politics, the more your views may change or just really skyrocket to a different spectrum. The further your scopes of political, the spectrum of political points of views are revealed. When you realize that most black, Asian, ethnic minorities come from conservative cultures with the same values reflected in certain parties, then you realize that, we grew up with certain values that are different. But anyway, don't want to ramble on for too long, but I was going to show you one more slide. Uh, this guy Kende Andrews is anytime I see him on in the media with interviews, he plays on race a lot, identitarian. You know, when it doesn't make sense, like what do you want to play on? Um, oh, and this is a slide of the current MPs or representatives in the UK Parliament. In the bottom left, you've got Sean Bailey. He's a candidate for London Mayor. He's been critical against Sadiq Khan's um, political actions in London, and he's active online. You got different um, politicians on here, and you can find a list of them on online. I'm going to find the link right here. One second. It's just you just get fed up with hearing the same nonsense, About to find the list of those individuals. And look, just search up list of ethnic minorities in politics in the UK, and you see how diverse these groups are. Black and Asian, you know, Arab politicians who are doing their role in each constituents, representing every constituent, and they're not all labor representatives. There's a high percentage of labor representatives, but as you can see, it's a mixed breed. There's nothing wrong with that.